Prepare yourself, brave viewer, for 3 tales that defy logic and explore the darkest corners of the human mind. On a full moon night, a family of farmers faces a battle between the supernatural and the force of nature. In the second story, a young man gets more than he bargained for when he uncovers a deadly secret. And finally, an unseen entity stalks those who dare to look where they shouldn't. But be careful, as these stories may follow you into your worst nightmares. Welcome, horror lovers, to the Thursday Nightmares channel. That night, the full moon hovered over the clear sky of Goyas, illuminating the vast expanse of the Almeida family farm. The usual tranquility had been replaced by a growing unease. The animals, normally calm, were restless, as if they sensed something terrible. In the corral, the cattle were mooing nervously, and even the dogs, always alert, remained silent, only growling softly. The father, Joaquim, watched with concern, smelling a strong, sour odor that he couldn't identify. "It must be a jaguar prowling around," he muttered, grabbing the shotgun he always kept by the door. "Rafael, Tiago, let's go take a look." His sons, grown men, took their weapons and flashlights, following their father with cautious steps. They walked across the yard, the packed dirt crunching under their boots. Joaquim's eyes were sharp, scanning the darkness, while the distant sound of horses neighing filled the air. They knew a jaguar would be a formidable opponent, but they were ready to defend the farm. As they approached the corral, the stench intensified, a smell of rotting flesh mixed with something wild. Tiago's flashlight beam illuminated a terrible scene. Several cattle were mutilated, their bodies scattered across the ground. Torn flesh, exposed bones, and blood staining the earth made Rafael's stomach knot. "This isn't the work of a jaguar," Tiago murmured, feeling a chill run down his spine. Suddenly, the sound of the horses neighing turned frantic. The shadows of the trees seemed to shift, and Joaquim felt his heart race. They ran toward the stable, where the horses were out of control, galloping in circles as if fleeing from something invisible. Then they saw it, a huge, grotesque figure, half man, half beast, emerging from the shadows. The werewolf was covered in thick, filthy fur, its eyes glowing with a menacing red light. The smell it gave off was suffocating, a mix of blood, sweat, and decay. Sharp claws and exposed teeth gleamed in the moonlight as a low, guttural growl escaped its throat. The 3 men froze, unable to believe what they were seeing. "Dear God," Rafael muttered, unable to take his eyes off the creature. Before they could react, a swift and agile shadow leaped from the trees. It was a large jaguar, its muscular body moving with predatory grace. The beast attacked the werewolf with a deafening roar, its claws slicing through the air. The werewolf, caught off guard, instinctively raised its own claws to defend itself. The ensuing battle was savage. The jaguar was fast, agile, its jaws clamping down on the werewolf's arm as its claws raked the creature's chest. The werewolf, however, was immensely strong, and with a sudden movement, it managed to free its arm, tearing into the jaguar's flank with its sharp claws. The sound of flesh ripping and bones cracking echoed through the farm. The jaguar roared in pain but didn't retreat. It attacked again, its fangs aiming for the werewolf's neck while its claws slashed with deadly precision. The werewolf, with supernatural strength, grabbed the jaguar's head, trying to crush it, but the wild beast twisted, biting the werewolf's shoulder with terrifying force. The smell of fresh blood filled the air, the ground now a battlefield stained red. The werewolf, feeling the pain and fury, let out a howl that made the men step back in terror. With a powerful blow, it hurled the jaguar away, sending it crashing into a nearby tree. The jaguar got up, staggering but determined. Both monsters were wounded, but neither would back down. The jaguar leaped again, aiming for the werewolf's legs, while the werewolf tried to crush the beast's skull with a downward strike. The confrontation was like a deadly dance, an exchange of blows that made it clear only one would emerge alive. The werewolf's claws found their target, slashing the jaguar's belly, but before it fell, the jaguar managed to sink its teeth into the werewolf's neck. For a moment, everything stopped. The werewolf, bleeding profusely from its neck, let out a final growl before dropping to its knees. The jaguar, gravely injured, released its bite, taking a few steps back before collapsing, exhausted and dying. The men stood frozen, unable to believe the scene before them, their hearts still pounding in their chests. The werewolf tried to stand, but its strength was fading. With one last fierce glance, it fell forward, immobilized by pain and exhaustion. The jaguar, victorious but mortally wounded, let out a final breath before succumbing to its injuries. The farm was silent once more, the only sound the pounding of the men's own hearts. Joachim, still speechless, lowered his shotgun, his eyes fixed on the fallen bodies. Raphael and Tiago remained motionless, their breaths heavy as they tried to process what they had just witnessed. The persistent stench of the werewolf and the fresh blood lingered in the air, making the scene even more surreal. Let's get out of here," Joachim finally said, his voice trembling, breaking the silence. They slowly retreated, leaving the clearing behind, knowing no one would believe what they had seen. The fear of another night like that one settled deep in their minds as they returned to the house, still smelling death and fear in the air. And even with the relief of the jaguar's victory, they knew the woods surrounding the farm could hold other dangers, but that is another story. The cold light of the interrogation room burned my eyes, and the silence was only broken by the sound of the detective's pen scribbling on paper. I was handcuffed to the steel table, and every second of waiting felt like an eternity. I felt lost, confused, as if I was being accused of something impossible. Me, a murderer? I couldn't understand. The older detective looked at me cautiously, as if dealing with a corner animal. "So, Gabriel, do you want to tell us what happened?" he asked calmly. I sighed, my throat dry, and prepared to speak. All of this still felt like a nightmare. Maybe, if I told the story from the beginning, they could understand what really happened. "It started months ago," I began, my voice weak. "My father was very sick, terminally ill. I had spent everything I had on treatments, but nothing worked. It was on one of those nights, when I was completely desperate, that I decided to go out for a drink. I needed to drown my frustration in something." The younger detective was taking notes, but it was the older one who seemed to really be paying attention. His eyes never left mine. "Go on," he said. I remembered the scene as if it were yesterday. I was in the nearest bar to my house, drinking alone at a corner table. The background music and the conversations of the other patrons seemed like distant noise, muffled by the sadness I carried. With each sip I took, the feeling of helplessness grew. My father was dying, and there was nothing I could do. Then he appeared, I continued. A man I had never seen before. He approached my table and started talking to me, as if we were old friends. I didn't have the energy to push him away. I was too drunk, too tired. The detective leaned back in his chair. "What did he say?" I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to remember exactly. The man, in a dark suit with cold eyes, had a strange presence, but at the time, I was too inebriated to notice the danger. At first, he just asked normal questions, like he was curious about what I was doing there alone. The conversation flowed, and without realizing it, I started to vent. I talked about my father, about his illness, about how I felt useless. I think the alcohol made me say more than I should. And then, he asked me something. "What?" asked the older detective. He asked, "What if there was a way for your father to be cured?" I paused, feeling a lump in my throat at the memory. At the time, I didn't even think. I was in such a deep state of despair that anything seemed better than the reality I was living in. I told him I would pay anything if that were possible, I whispered. The younger detective finally stopped writing and looked directly at me. "And what did he do?" I swallowed hard, the moment crystallizing in my mind like a vivid nightmare. He reached out to me and said, "Deal." I laughed. I thought it was some joke, something ridiculous that the alcohol was making me take seriously. But without thinking, I shook his hand. When I did, I felt a coldness run up my arm, but at the time, I thought it was just the effect of the drink. That handshake marked the beginning of everything. And then, the older detective insisted. I went home, without thinking much about what had happened. And the next day, something changed. My father was better. Much better. It was as if the illness had vanished, as if he had never been on the brink of death. The doctors couldn't explain it, but I knew something was wrong. I sighed, fighting against the tears that welled up. I thought I had done the right thing. That, somehow, that stranger at the bar had kept his promise. But I didn't know the price I was paying. But then, the nightmares started. I continued. I dreamed of deaths, of blood, of violence. It was always me, killing someone, but I never clearly saw the faces of the victims. At first, I thought they were just bad dreams, consequences of the stress. But things got worse. I began to lose track of time. There were nights when I woke up in places I didn't recognize, with mud and stains that I couldn't explain. I started to fear myself, not knowing what was happening. And then the bodies began to appear. Violent deaths, always near crossroads. The police started calling the killer the Crossroads Maniac because of the locations of the murders and the brutality of the crimes. The older detective leaned forward. "Gabriel, did you know we've been investigating this killer for months?" I shook my head, confused. I couldn't believe I was being accused. "You're making a mistake. I'm not that killer." The younger detective pushed a tablet towards me with a video ready to play. "Look at this, Gabriel. We recorded your last night at the crossroads. It might help you remember." I hesitated but pressed play. The screen showed a dark road, illuminated only by the headlights of a parked car. The scene seemed normal until I saw myself on the screen. I was there, with a knife in my hand, walking calmly towards a woman who was screaming desperately. I closed my eyes and turned away, unable to watch any more. The sound of her screams still echoed in my ears as I attacked her. In the video, my face was a mask of indifference. My stomach churned. This can't be real," I whispered, feeling the world collapse around me. The older detective stared at me harshly. "It's you, Gabriel. We don't care if you made a deal with the devil or something else. What matters here is that you are the Crossroads Maniac. And we got you, you bastard." I wanted to deny it. I wanted to scream that it couldn't be true. But at the same time, something inside me knew it was. I remembered the nights without memory, the nightmares. The pact had taken my soul, turning me into something I didn't recognize. The detective stood up, slowly walking around the table, speaking in a cold and implacable voice. "You're going to rot in jail for what you've done, you bastard. There's no escape for monsters like you." His words reached my ears like a distant echo. I knew he was talking to me, but I could no longer pay attention. My mind was elsewhere. My gaze was drawn to something behind the detective. Something only I could see. There, leaning against the wall of the interrogation room, was him. The man from the bar. The same man who had reached out to me and sealed my fate that fateful night. He looked at me intently, with a demonic smile on his face, as if he were enjoying my suffering. His eyes gleamed with malice, and although his figure was as real as anyone else in the room, I knew that no one else could see him. He was there to remind me of what I had done. To remind me that the pact would never be broken. The detective kept talking, but his words dissolved into the air. I couldn't take my eyes off that cruel smile, knowing that I was just a pawn in his game. I shook his hand once, and now my soul belonged to him. I still had the bitter taste of whiskey in my mouth as I drove down that deserted road. It was past midnight, and the only thing keeping me company was the radio station, which occasionally played a good song and the rhythmic hum of the engine. My wife had stayed at her parents' house for the weekend after my mother-in-law's birthday party, but I had to return. As usual, I had an early meeting at the office. I sighed, rubbing my tired eyes, trying to focus. The road seemed endless ahead of me, with the headlights illuminating only a narrow strip of asphalt, while darkness swallowed everything beyond that. It was one of those quiet rural roads, surrounded by nothing but dense trees and empty fields. The kind of road that made you feel completely alone in the world. The journey was long and tiring until I noticed something up ahead, a figure standing by the side of the road. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as I got closer, the figure became clearer. A woman. She was completely still, right at the edge of the headlight's reach, arm outstretched, hand closed with her thumb up, hitchhiking. I slowed down, but what the hell is a woman doing alone on such a deserted road, and at night? She looked normal, but there was something strange. Her clothes were dirty, her face was pale. I stopped the car about 4 meters from her, but when I looked in the rearview mirror, I didn't see her anymore. My eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, absolutely nothing. The road behind me was empty. She had simply vanished. What the hell? Where did she go? I muttered to myself. My heart raced as I scanned the darkness with my eyes. Am I seeing things? Maybe it was the whiskey or the exhaustion messing with my head. I shook my head, started the car again, and drove on. Whatever had just happened didn't make sense. But no matter how much I tried to focus on the road ahead, the image of that woman kept pounding in my mind. As I began to accelerate, suddenly, the glare of headlights appeared behind me. A car. No, it wasn't just a car, it was a police car. The red and blue lights cut through the darkness like a blade. The police car slowed down and, to my surprise, stopped exactly where I had seen the woman. I watched in the rearview mirror as the officers got out of the car, flashlights in hand, and approached the roadside. My heart was in my throat. They were looking for something, or someone. What's going on? I whispered to myself, feeling a knot in my stomach. Should I go back? Tell them what I saw? But, as I wrestled with my thoughts, a chill ran down my spine. Maybe it was better not to get involved. Whatever was happening there didn't seem right. I didn't want to stay and find out. I stepped on the gas, deciding it was time to get out of there as fast as possible. After about 20 minutes, as I struggled against the sleep that was beginning to take over, I decided to stop the car somewhere and take a 15-minute nap. But something up ahead caught my attention, someone in the darkness of the road hitchhiking. It was her. The same woman. She was standing by the side of the road again. This time I could clearly see her face. Pale, her eyes completely dark, reflecting the car's headlights. I floored the accelerator, the car's engine roaring as I sped down the road, my heart pounding wildly in my chest. The drowsiness that had been creeping in vanished instantly. I kept looking in the mirror, expecting to see her, but the road behind me was once again dark and empty. Minutes passed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. That woman, how could she have disappeared like that and reappeared so quickly? I didn't stop until I got home, my heart still racing, sweat dripping down my forehead. I parked in the garage and sat in the car for a moment, trying to calm myself down. My house looked peaceful, nothing out of the ordinary, but I didn't feel the least bit safe. I grabbed my things and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. The house was dark and silent, and I felt a strange sense of relief. At least, I was home. At least, I was safe here. Or so I thought. I climbed the stairs, ready to collapse into bed, but when I reached the top, something caught my attention. Footprints. It looked like someone had walked in with muddy feet and entered the house without cleaning them. They led from the front door, up the stairs, and into my bedroom. My blood ran cold. I stood there, frozen, staring at those footprints under the dim hallway light. My mind was racing. Could a burglar have entered the house while we were out of town? No. There was no way someone could have entered without triggering the alarm. The police would have come to check. Slowly, I began to back away, breathless. Then, I heard it, the sound of something falling, coming from my bedroom. Someone, or something, was in there. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I stood there, heart pounding, waiting for whatever was about to happen. The door to my bedroom creaked open, just a crack, and that's when I saw him. It was Sparky, my daughter's cat. That little bastard nearly gave me a heart attack. Sparky walked toward me but stopped halfway. He turned toward the bathroom, his fur standing on end. I looked in the same direction, and that's when I saw her, in the shadows. The same woman, staring at me with those dark eyes. My breath caught in my throat, and before I could react, she vanished into thin air. Silence filled the house again, but I knew she was still there, watching me.